Look, we came here to see David Lopan, all right? David Lopan? Then you have succeeded, Mr. Burton. I don't get it. Shut up, Mr. Burton. You are not brought upon this earth to get it. Don't you love James Hong's voice as David Lopan in the movie that I'm going to be talking about this week? On a few words, the first movie-themed episode, as I sit down with the Tiger Schulman's MMA Joshu, Brandon Cuttino, a previous guest on our podcast, and we talk about a movie that's in his top 5 of all time, Big Trouble in Little China. We just recently celebrated the 30th anniversary this past July 2nd. And for these movie reviews, I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach. You see, I took acting class in high school, film appreciation, which I aced. I've been in lots of productions as a lead, supporting, extra, movies, TV, commercials, things like that. I even directed and edited a feature-length documentary that I'm sure a lot of you have seen, The Wrestling Road Diaries. And on top of editing thousands of hours of wrestling, weddings, podcasts, whatever you want to say. So I think I know how to tell a story. You can look up my IMDb, and speaking of IMDb, now that you know my credentials, I wanted to make this different than I suppose the majority of these reviews or podcasts that talk about movies. I didn't just want to regurgitate facts because I know myself as a fan, I get obsessive about things. I do my own research, I do my own watching, listening, reading. So I didn't just want to repeat stuff that you could find out easily on the commentary track or looking up the fun facts on IMDb. Like we all know, I'm sure, if you're a fan of this movie, that it started out as a Western originally in the screenplay. I wanted to give some more personal stories and observations, and that's what Joshu and I are going to talk about this week on A Few Words. For instance, what's the real meaning in the scene with the Guardian where Egg Shen says, "I am the pest, come back to haunt you, David Lopan"? What does that really mean? And just so you know, right off the bat, I am kind of going on the notion that you've seen these movies already, so there's not going to be any spoiler alerts. I mean, the movie's 30 years old. It hasn't been spoiled. As someone on the Wrestling Roundtable Facebook group said to me once, it's not a spoiler if it's already been released. If you happen to have not seen the movie yet, hopefully this will entice you to check out the movie. In fact, recently my girlfriend, when she heard that I was going to be doing this podcast on Big Trouble in Little China, she had never seen the movie. And I'm sure a lot of guys can relate to that. You got a girlfriend and you find out they haven't seen a specific movie. You're like, what? How have you not seen that? So we watched it and her reaction was, it was weird. What did you like about it? And I said, that's exactly why I liked it. And I could understand up to a certain point. It probably seems like a caper type of movie, but then it gets supernatural out of nowhere. So I could understand that, but that's part of its charm. So again, these movie reviews will be spoilerific. We're going to actually talk about the movie and analyze it. That's not to say we won't talk about the plot as we go along with our other observations, but just laying that out right off the bat. So without further ado, let's have a few words on Big Trouble in Little China. Mr. Burton. Joshu.
Oos.
You ever get annoyed with me saying that to you? I say it to you even in texts.
Nah, it's okay. It's go with me.
It's just ingrained in me that I should show respect to the higher rank than me. It's drilled into me that I should say oos.
Hey, I understand. Please, there's times when I'm out and about in regular settings, and when somebody asks me a question, I always sometimes want to reply with oos, even though they won't know what I'm talking about, but I always catch myself.
Well, I guess it's somewhat appropriate that we're using that martial art discipline here when we start talking about Big Trouble in Little China. It's the 30th anniversary, released in 1986. And to catch some of our newbies up to speed, maybe some of our younger listeners, it was directed by John Carpenter, written by Gary Goldman and David Z. Weinstein, produced by Larry J. Franco, music done by John Carpenter and Alan Haworth, and it stars Kurt Russell as Jack Burton, me, Dennis Dunn as Wang Chi, James Hung as David Lo Pan, Victor Wong as Egg Shen, and the two girls with green eyes, Kim Cattrall as Gracie Law, and Susie Pai as Mao Yin. I don't know about you, Joshu, but I can remember when I saw this movie the first time. Do you remember seeing it the first time?
I can remember it was on a Saturday, definitely in the 90s. I was a kid. And it was on like Fox 5 at the time. It's like when Fox used to play movies,
right?
Saturday afternoon. That's how I got into it.
For me, it was Channel 11, which is a New York station, and we still got it here in New Jersey because we would get some stations from Philadelphia too. But whoever put the ad together, and this was a couple years after the theatrical release, I guess, at least a year. Whoever put the ad together brilliantly sold this movie to a young child at the time, because the ad went something like this: good guys, bad guys, ghosts, monsters. And I'm like, this movie's got everything.
Yep.
So of course I'm not going to miss it. The plot of it basically is, as I mentioned, Kurt Russell plays Jack Burton, a trucker in San Francisco. He delivers to Chinatown, and he's got a buddy, Wang Chi, and they go to meet Wang's future wife, Mao Yin, at the airport, who gets kidnapped by the Lords of Death street gang. Kim Cattrall bumps into them there. She's trying to prevent this from happening. As it turns out, Mao Yin is sought after by this ancient spirit, I guess. This undead man, David Lo Pan, because he needs a Chinese girl with green eyes to appease the emperor who has cursed me. Kim Cattrall happens to have green eyes too. So they get all involved in this plot that happens in Chinatown. One of the funnest movies I've ever seen. I have a buddy, Will Brooks, who you may know from the Wrestling Roundtable, and I remember going to Philadelphia Comic-Con or something along those lines, and I met James Hung, and he signed my DVD insert and everything, and I was telling Will on a phone call in the car that I'm going to this Comic-Con to get James Hung's autograph on the Big Trouble in Little China DVD, and he said, that's one of those movies that it's really cheesy and you don't really realize that until you watch it when you're older. I'm like, oh no, this movie, when it would be shown on AMC. Now, when we were kids, AMC would only show black and white movies. That was basically the format of it. It was just black and white movies. Didn't actually have to be a classic, just had to be old and black and white. But just going by the name of it, when this was shown on the later AMC, and this is just before, I guess, they started getting into The Walking Dead and other sort of series where they were definitely branching away from their previous niche that I guess Turner Classic Movies has filled. When you hear the name American Movie Classic, though, and they show Big Trouble in Little China, it definitely makes you go, yeah, it is a classic.
That movie, to me, it is. Like I said, I remember this movie as a kid, and I remember just a few years ago, Encore was playing it non-stop, and it was just like, yeah, man, this is such a good movie. Like I could watch this movie over and over and over. I can't get tired of it.
On a previous podcast, you had mentioned Bruce Lee. Was this one of the first martial arts movies you had seen? Because I think it's definitely my first martial art movie.
I definitely seen like Ninja Turtles beforehand, and you know, and like the Bruce Lee's movies and stuff like that. This movie having martial arts definitely got me excited to watch it, though.
And you just watched it the other day. Was it on DVD? Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a big distinction there. Let's make it clear. Because seeing it in HD, I'm constantly amazed when we've seen movies a million times, like in this case, but then we see it in high definition. It just looks so good. And another aspect of our childhood is now kids are born into a world where all TVs are 16:9 letterbox. And that is not the case for us. There are some movies that I watched so many times, but that frame of 4:3, the square, is how I remember a lot of shots. For instance, the first scene we were just talking about before we recorded, immediately the music cues. Music is such a huge factor in this movie to me. Immediately sets the tone. This scene was added on after shooting, actually. They wanted to make Jack Burton seem more heroic.
Yeah.
Because one of the great themes about this, and this is talked about by John Carpenter and Kurt Russell in
the commentary.
Yeah, like people really know about that commentary track because they're really having a lot of fun talking about the movie, and it is fun to listen to. But they talk about how at the time in the mid 80s, this is the age of Rambo and Schwarzenegger and a lot of the big R-rated blood and guts cursing action movies that were so great back then. Jack Burton was not that at all.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't like those guys, but he was still a good person. Like, he was a solid character.
He just had so much unsubstantiated bravado, undeserved swagger, where he thought he was so much more capable than he really was.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about the character, that he'd throw the knife by accident, he'd shoot up in the air and knock himself out with the debris.
Yep.
He'd constantly be messing up, and Wang Chi is the one who's actually doing all the groundwork with his martial arts.
I remember that scene, like when he shot the gun in the air and knocked himself out. Like, I remember watching, I'm like, man, what a moron. You know? But the thing is, though, like, I think like Jack Burton, though, like at that time is really what I think really every American is, where you think that you're tougher than what you probably are. But like I said, though, he still was a solid character with good cause because he wanted to help his friend out. So even though he was so scared to do some things, he still did it because he wanted to do the right thing.
Right. And this scene was added on to the beginning of the movie to really establish him a little more, I guess, than what his actions would show for a lot of the big action scenes, I suppose.
Yeah.
It actually had a good cameo by, I guess, character actor Jerry Hardin, who some of our fans might know as Deep Throat in the X-Files. So it's good to see him like, Mr. Chen, what can you do to convince me of this magic?
Yep.
That's the shot I was talking about with the 4x3, like when Egg Shen turns around like, Egg Chen, bus driver. Watching that on TV, I never saw the secretary.
Yeah, never saw it in the
background
back, right? Yeah.
because of how it was panned and scanned. So it's really neat seeing it in HD and the way it was meant to be, so to speak. And I also love how when we see modern movies, and we'll get to the rumors about The Rock's version later on, but when you see modern takes on old franchises, like for instance, the new Ghostbusters movie, everything is CG as far as the special effects for the most part. And this was, of course, pre-digital.
Yep.
I think The Abyss might have come out around the same time, and we're still years away from Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park and really ushering in the CG era.
Yeah.
Some of these practical effects, even when they're driving on the freeway, when they're going to the airport, that's a rear projection. When they're playing this basically old technique from practically the 30s of just playing video on a screen to simulate them driving, you see the reflection even in his mirror. And I kept thinking, I don't know if that's rear projection or not, but it's the simplest thing. The lightning is cartoon. It's animated, hand-drawn, it seemed, but it works.
Yeah.
The effects and the way it's shot, it's definitely a bygone era. When we get to the action scenes, you'll definitely see, like, if this was done today, this would all be shaky cam, hard to follow. And that's not to say the pace isn't fast. This isn't a movie from the 30s where there's a two-shot for a minute or whatever. There is a decent amount of cut in the average shot length, but you still see everything. It's not too fast, and it's not too shaky you can't follow the action.
David Lopan, basically like when he's going through walls.
Oh, when he's floating.
Yeah, basically, when he's floating and he's going through walls, you're thinking to yourself, this is from the 1980s, but they still made it look good.
And it's simple and it works. He's just on a dolly.
Yeah, and then even too, when he was kind of reaching at Mao Yin, but he couldn't touch her. And you just see his hands just floating through her body and everything. They did good with what they had at the time.
And seeing it in HD really brings out the makeup they put on him.
Yeah.
Back to the beginning. You had also mentioned in our previous podcast with you that you were a gamer. Right after the first scene where Egg Shen has the little lightning.
Yep.
And then they cut to the opening title and the truck coming down the hill and up and over.
Yep.
Is it just me? I don't know this for certain, but is that shot not copied practically exactly how it is in WCW NWO Revenge on N64?
Oh, wow. You know what? I never really thought about that.
Do you remember the one where Sting shows up in the middle of the street in front of the truck and everything? I swear it's copied exactly like that.
Man. And it's been a while since I played that game. No,
Yeah, but as soon as I turned on the N64 and saw that shot, I was like, that's Big Trouble in Little China. We keep talking about watching it when we're young. And I guess when we do watch it when we're older, we have different perspectives on these things. We're not thinking about like later on there would be wire work and rear projection and special effects and this and that. But looking at it from a more educated point of view, I still appreciate the technique involved, like I said. But another thing I never would have picked up on when I was a kid, Kurt Russell is basically doing John Wayne. I never would have noticed that as a kid, but now when I watch it, I'm like, oh my God, that is John Wayne. Get to the point, eh? Yeah. You know what Jack Burton does at a time like this? You could hear.
Yeah, exactly.
He's just doing John Wayne.
Yeah, you're right. Probably too, as kids, we really didn't know that much about John Wayne. But as we got older, oh yeah, I can see it now.
Just doing a couple lines there. And we've been doing it since before we hit record here. I think this is one of the most quotable movies that I've seen anyway. It's not like, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, or Rosebud, or some of the famous movie quotes over the years.
Yeah.
But those lines really stick out in my head, like, never can tell.
Yeah. He gives you those one-liners that you can use, you can quote it out, and people will know what you're talking about, or they'll at least remember it. Other characters too, like David Lopan, he has some good quotes in there too.
What are your favorites?
Well, my favorite one, of course, is when he's talking about how he wants to rule the world. Kurt Russell agrees with him and says, you can rule the world, and then he
From beyond the grave.
Yes, and he just responds with, indeed.
Or check into the Psycho World, whichever comes first. Oh, come on, I'm supposed to buy this.
Exactly, and it's just funny stuff. Like, I would tell anybody and everybody to watch this movie.
And now this really pisses me off to no end. Even little things like that, I still remember, like, it's all in the reflexes. This is going to take crackerjack timing. One of the biggest laughs for me is when he's in the brothel later on, and she says, could you take off your tie, please? And he says, I know what you mean. My wife gave it to me for Christmas.
Yep.
Everybody relax. I'm here. I tend to use that a lot. But when they're walking with Egg Shen in the rain, and Wang Chi says, a brave man likes the feel of nature on his face.
Yep.
How many times I think of that when I'm walking in the rain, because it doesn't bother me. It's just water. And then everyone else wants to use the umbrella, but I go back to that one. So Mao Yin gets kidnapped at the airport, and that leads us into the first big action scene, which is the Chang Sings versus the Wing Kong. This is when the movie really kicks into high gear for two reasons. The action's great. And just the way Carpenter builds the mood, not just with his shots. Like I said, you can see everything. You're in the moment. You feel it. Not even just the music, which stands out in and of itself, but the sound effects too. I'm sure you can remember specific sound effects in key scenes. Two character actors pop up in this one, Al Leung and Gerald Akamura, who people don't know by name, but you know by their face.
Yeah.
Like Al Leung, he was in tons of movies like Lethal Weapon, all the way through to Matthew Broderick's Godzilla. He was the one with the balder head and the mustache and longer hair in the back.
Yeah, the bad guy.
Yeah.
He had the butcher knife.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other one with the bald head and the goatee.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
The one who had the guns, who just came out of nowhere, just started shooting everybody up first.
He pops up, Akamura does, in Hot Shots Part 2.
Yeah.
So when you see these guys, you're like, oh, I know these guys. And they started out as stuntmen people, but then they branch out into these great careers. In that scene also, we get the three storms.
Yes.
Rain, thunder, and lightning.
Yep.
I love every part of this movie, like I said, but the characters are so vivid. Even the characters who don't have names, like the Wing Kong and the Chang Sings, you see their faces and you remember them later on in the movie.
My favorite guy, of course, was Lightning. He reminded me of Raiden.
Oh,
of course, Raiden was my favorite guy. I thought that was cool, and plus he had the powers of lightning.
The influence is very clear, and I think it's been stated as such by Ed Boon and John Tobias that this was a big influence on Mortal Kombat. And with Shang Tsung, if you remember, Shang Tsung, after you beat Goro, was an old man looking like Lo Pan.
Yeah.
And then he transformed just like Lo Pan did. Actually, Lo Pan going from old to young to street merchant, like he had that one little shot James Hong did.
Yeah, when he did that,
Right. It kind of reminded me of Bram Stoker's Dracula later on, which is one of my favorite horror movies. Gary Oldman as Dracula did a similar transformation in this spirit form as first the old man, then the young guy. And in that scene, Jack Burton and Wang Chi run away.
Yep.
His truck gets taken. They still need to find Mao Yin. and they get word that she's in this brothel. Again, we're talking about home theater stuff with Blu-ray and whatever. This scene really demonstrated surround sound. I am one of these people that need to have I don't want to say tricked out, but a pretty good home theater setup. And the rain is wonderful in this scene. You hear the surround sound really well in this. We just talked about this huge action scene. It's funny how movies trick our mind, where we fill in the blanks where this person's being stabbed and we only see it for a split second.
Yep.
If you really analyze it, he's not really doing anything.
Yeah.
But we put that together in our own mind, so it seems a lot more violent than it really is. So there is a lot of good action violent scenes in this one, but it's also a very funny movie.
Yes, it is a very funny movie.
It operates on so many different levels. Like Lopan was just cracking you up before. Even just throwaway lines, I mean, they are intended to be jokes, but like when H.N. and Wang's uncle are talking in the restaurant about what to do about these spirits and Chinese culture, and H.N. says there's all these different influences like Buddhism, Taoism, whatever. We take what we want and we leave the rest.
Yep.
Just like your salad bar.
Yeah.
Like, even that one's a good line. I think that's the funniest scene, actually, the brothel scene.
Yeah, like that is really one of the funny scenes, because the older woman, she has such a stern face, but she is saying funny lines about how she's trying to say like how Chinese girls don't have green eyes.
I like the other one, the headmistress, cash or charge.
Yep. Cash, because it's non-deductible.
From here, we segue into Lopan's headquarters. That's where we finally get the big scene of Lopan in the wheelchair, which is hilarious. The three storms take on, I guess, a more human form.
They're just in like regular clothes.
And the guy who plays Rain, his name is Peter Kwong. If I could get my hair looking like that, I'd be very happy. It looks beautiful, if I may say so.
When Jack Burton basically goes to David Lopan, you've had 2,000 years to find the girl. You're not doing something right, Dave. Like, what's going on? You're in my head. I'm like, yeah, man, it's been 2,000 years. Are you trying to tell me you haven't found a girl with green eyes? Is it really that hard for you to find a girl with green eyes?
There were others, to be sure, which is another line I use often. They try to get Mao Yin. They can't get their hands on her, but they rescue a whole bunch of other girls. They're trying to get out of the headquarters when Gracie Law is kidnapped by this monster.
Yeah.
Now, for a movie that's really good with special effects, at least in the close-ups, could there be a more rubber-looking monster suit than this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's what they had back in the day, you know? He still pulled it off. I mean, he was still ugly, tell that one for sure.
Back in the day, this was a suit from like the 30s, man. Like the rubber toes were bouncing all over the place. Like, in the long shots, it did not look good at all. So Gracie Law ends up in the hands of Lopan, and then he starts taking them through this weird trial of the burning blade.
Yes.
They have survived the burning blade. Tamed the savage heart.
Yes.
I will marry both women. I'll end up doing the whole movie if you let me. When we're talking about attention to detail, the set design, the costumes here, they looked great as the brides with the makeup and the headdress.
There was the scene before the wedding. They were all dressed up. Her and Mao Yin are all together. And then out of nowhere, she just like snaps out of
The trance?
the trance. How was she able to get out of it and out Mao Yin? And the next thing you know, the lightning comes up and then he puts them both back in a trance.
Yeah.
How was she able to not be in it?
It's a movie.
I know exactly. But you know, those are just the things that sometimes that I'm just thinking about. I'm like, maybe because she's not Chinese.
Right. I don't think it was anything egregious per se.
Yeah.
This moves into a wedding ceremony. He's going to marry both women, kill Gracie Law, and then live out his earthly pleasures with Mao Yin. And that's a great scene too. Right before they go down, there's this scene where he has the 6 demon bag, Egg Shen does, and they drink this potion to heighten their powers, and then the movie gets a lot more fantastical. And I like how it's kind of in a gray area, where I just mentioned the 3 storms taking on human form, in a sense. So they are physical. They're not exactly gods. Maybe they're demigods or semi-spirits, if you want to say, like even with Lopan. So I love how it's not exactly defined there.
Yeah.
There is one little weird scene where they're drinking the potion and then they toast to
The American flag?
the Marines and the servingmen. May the wings of liberty never lose a feather. It's fine, I guess, but it just seemed a little odd in the middle of this to me.
You guys talking about like Chinese, history, Chinese lore, but when you do this toast, you want to talk about the Marines and Navy and America, and I'm just like, Okay.
This leads into another huge fight. We had the big fight earlier in the alley, but this one's even more so with all the potion effects and everything. I wanted to ask you this question because I love that it's left unanswered or maybe unaddressed. Do you think Egg Shen is himself a spirit?
Yes, I do. I feel like Egg Shen is older than what he is.
Okay.
When they have their little battle of like the imaginary warriors.
It's like a video game.
Yeah, basically. And David Lopan says, "You can never beat me." So in my mind, I'm thinking, have they been doing this for many years?
That's exactly my reaction to it. Because if you take it literally, he says, "You never could beat me, Egg Shen." Now, you could take that as he never could, as in it's not possible.
Yep.
But you could also take it in, this has happened many times before.
Yep.
There is, if you read between the lines, I suppose, a theme of Egg Shen, this is my destiny.
Yep.
Even before, when that floating ball of eyes spots them before they get in the room and reports to Lopan and he sees it in his head. "You've come a long ways to find me." That could even be taken more so than coming from above ground Chinatown. Yeah. So I had the same reaction too.
When they do basically say like the video game of the Warriors, is that them? Exactly. Yeah. Is that them from that time many years ago in China? Like, is that them? It's a lot to think about.
And again, I love that it's left open to interpretation because there are some times when movies try to get too cute and they try to be too artsy and, it's up to the viewer. In this case, I think it was done really well, and obviously we're still talking about it 30 years after it came out that it's not certain or not.
Yeah.
And I just love that juicy detail. And right at the end of this scene is when we get into some of the big deaths for the Three Storms and Lopan. And these are some of my favorite movie deaths. When thunder just blows up.
Yep.
The entrance for Lightning was a lot more memorable than his death with the Buddha statue on top of him. But he just looked so cool when he walked out onto that music and the lightning and making the ceiling fall down. Yep. You really can't top getting a knife to the head. It's all in the reflexes, and then it causes the domino effect of all the statues.
Yep.
Everybody loves that one.
It goes back to really the beginning of the movie when Wang makes that bet about cutting the bottle in half with a knife.
Nothing or double.
Exactly. And he does it, and then boom, he catches it, and he says it. It's all in the reflexes. So that's another play on words for later on down the road at the end of the movie.
With the lipstick on his face.
Yes.
But we were just talking before we started recording too. They kill the bad guys. They escape the deleted scene that's on the DVD. I love having extra content. I love seeing deleted scenes on certain movies. You could see why they were cut because they're just basically superfluous and they don't particularly add to it. And then once in a while you see one that you go, oh, I wish that was in the movie.
Yeah.
They find Jack Burton's truck. Everybody gets in. They get out of the headquarters and they get to a stoplight. Wang Chi's kissing Mao Yin. Oh, isn't that sweet? Terrific. Kim Cattrall says, as Gracie Law, the light's green. You can go now. And if you look at Jack Burton, he's making a face like, you gotta be kidding me. Because I think that's actually his line in the next scene. What he spots is the Lords of Death street gang that kidnapped Mao Yin in the first place at the beginning of the movie, and he knocks them off a dock with his truck.
Yep.
And he says, I feel a lot better now. I really do. I kind of feel like after seeing it so many years later, that I would too if it was still in the movie. It doesn't take up too much time to the runtime, and I think it would have been a nice little bookend.
Yeah, I guess another smile. It would have been another laughter. It was funny just seeing them just come up from behind them and just booting them, because also too, you could see Kim Cattrall's character was kind of getting a smile because I think she knew what was about to happen, and so was Wang and all of them.
We talked about Jack Burton not being the traditional hero. At the end, when everyone's having a nice goodbye dinner, basically, Egg Shen makes his way off into the sunset. Jack Burton and Gracie Law never basically consummate their romance. Yeah. As he's about to leave, Margot, the other supporting character, this reporter, says, Jack, aren't you going to at least kiss her? Or aren't you going to kiss her? Whatever. And then he looks at her and he goes, nope. And leaves. How'd you feel about that?
that's Jack Burton. That's him. That's how he rolls.
I think it's perfectly in tune with what the character is in this movie. Like I said, it's not the A+ competent guy, and this isn't the traditional movie. It didn't do well at the box office that year. I think everyone who's been involved with the movie has talked about how it really got its audience on home video. Look at us. We didn't see it in the theater, but we've grown to love the movie. This is a big reason why. It is not the conventional movie in most senses, and certainly not this one where the good guy's got to get the girl at the end. He just leaves her.
You kind of get that really from him in the beginning of the movie when he's on...
This is the Pork Chop Express talking to you on a dark and stormy night.
Jack Burton kind of does his own thing. He's not like everybody else. In the beginning of the movie, too, we're like Egg Shin, when he's talking about Jack Burton, you know, he's saying like he is a hero. That man has done a lot of stuff. We should be grateful for who he is. Because of who he is, they were able to do the things that they were able to do.
Hey, he was there.
Yeah. You know?
Then we go to the famous ending where he's back on the Pork Chop Express where the monster comes out at the end for the nice little shot at the end. And we go to the music.
Yep.
The theme done by the Coupe de Villes, sung by John Carpenter, which, by the way, when Napster was first around, I started getting into that in like January of 2001. One of the first things I downloaded was the Big Trouble in Little China theme. Such a great soundtrack. You can look it up on YouTube and you could find different tracks and everything, but if only that was more available.
Yeah. It was kind of really perfect to me. Like everything to me went really, really well.
Nice and synthesized 80s type score too.
Yep.
That John Carpenter was really good at back then. There has been rumors in the last year that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was in negotiations to star in a remake. The reaction to this, especially for me, was not positive. I did not like the idea of this at all. Seeing how some remakes have turned out the last few years, I'm a little justified in that. We have to make a point here about remakes. People complain all the time about there's nothing original anymore. Everything's a spin-off, a prequel, a reboot, a remake, this or that or whatever. Maybe more so lately, I guess, but this has always been a Hollywood thing. The Wizard of Oz was a remake, believe it or not. Silent films. How many silent films were remade when there were talkies? Frankenstein, Ben-Hur, Scarface was originally a black and white movie. This has been going on since the beginning of Hollywood, so it's not necessarily anything new. That being said, I don't mind remakes if they can bring something new and different and maybe better in some cases to the table. John Carpenter himself made one of the best remakes ever with The Thing in 1982. Originally, it was a 50s B-movie, basically, and David Cronenberg's The Fly in 1986, both horror movie remakes of 50s B-movies, and they took the original movies to a completely new level and knocked it out of the park. If it can do something like that, sure. I just don't see how or why The Rock's version of Big Trouble in Little China would be that. I mean, I just can't picture him as Jack Burton. I could picture him being a smart ass saying funny things, but not Jack Burton.
That's not a movie that needs to be remade. It's a movie that didn't do well in the box office. It got its following from home video, and maybe where they think now with the remake and with somebody like The Rock, a well-known star, it'll get its boom in the box office. But to me, like, there are certain movies that don't need a remake, like Roadhouse with Ronda Rousey. I'm like,
and Wahlberg?
Yeah, I'm like, what for? Patrick Swayze did a fine job with that. Would you do a remake of Back to the Future? No.
Oh, well, I mean, no. And Robert Zemeckis is doing his best to make sure that never happens, as he probably should, because, like I said, what is it going to bring to the table that's new and different? Is it just going to be a bunch of CG effects and loud noises and whatever? I don't need that. Actually, Jackie Chan was looked at to play Wang Chi originally, so maybe he could finally get his chance and do it this time. I love The Rock. I love this movie too, but I just don't see it. But let me throw this at you. How about instead of a remake, it's a sequel?
Yeah, the way how the movie ends, it makes you think that there is a sequel coming with the monster and everything like that, but there never was one.
And I believe there was some comic book series that was serving as a sequel, but whenever you get into, let's call it expanded universe, Star Wars stuff, it kind of exists in its own bubble, canon, and whether it's canon or not. But to me, if it's a comic book, it doesn't really count per se.
Exactly.
And I could see a sequel if it's, let's say, Kurt Russell coming back as Jack Burton. Would you want to see him and The Rock?
But what are you coming in with? Like, it's 30 years later. Like,
there could be another ancient demon. They got 30 years to spare.
Is The Rock maybe playing his son?
Nah, I don't think he has to be his son. Maybe he could just be someone working for Jack Burton Trucking Company. I haven't put too much thought into it, obviously, but I could see The Rock having a problem in San Francisco, Chinatown again. And, well, from what he's found out, he needs the help of someone who helped take care of the last time there was trouble. And then he looks up Jack Burton.
Yeah.
What do you want?
Yeah, it could be something like that. Yeah. It's the latest G.I. Joe, where they had to go find Bruce Willis, his character like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm sure I probably still would go watch it, but I don't know if I would be like too much of a big fan of the remake. Like, I'm more in favor of the sequel.
Whether another movie's made, a remake, or anything of that sorts, if it ever gets off the ground, either way, this movie still stands on its own. I'm going to keep enjoying it, and I hope you do too.
No, yeah. I'll definitely keep watching. I'm saying that's a top 5 movie for me. Top 5.
And like Jack Burton always says, what the hell?
Exactly.
Joshu, thank you to Brandon the Mechanic Cuttino for sitting down with me and discussing Big Trouble in Little China. The last time Joshu was on the podcast, he was promoting his fight in Pennsylvania July 30th. Unfortunately, that did not come to be. His opponent had to pull out and a replacement could not be found at the last minute, and that's got to be so gutting. This is certainly not the first time this has happened to Joshu, and I'm sure it won't be the last, but that's the fight game, and it's just got to kill you when you see these fighters, and especially in MMA, we see this so much, who have to pull out due to injury. Can you imagine how gutting that is? Forget even if you're a production person. You just edited this great commercial or put together this great poster, and now, like especially the crew had to at UFC 200, scramble and put all this production together, these t-shirts and banners and everything else, and sometimes just a couple days notice. Forget even that aspect of it. Imagine you're a fighter. You put this camp together. You put in all these hours of training and sweat on the mat and physical exertion and cutting weight and dieting and training every day and all this effort just to have it taken away from you through no fault of your own in most cases. That's got to be terrible. So I'm sorry that fight did not end up happening, but there is good news. As we talked about at the end of that episode, Glory is the main kickboxing company in the world now. If you're not familiar with kickboxing, there was a big promotion K1 years ago, but that's really fallen off, and now Glory Kickboxing was on Spike TV. Now they're on ESPN, and this card coming up Friday, September 9th, will feature Joshu Cuttino making it to the big stage. He will be fighting in the prelims at Glory 33, co-promoted by Lou Neglia at the Sun National Bank Center in Trenton, New Jersey. I'm so happy for Joshu to make it to the big stage. That's a huge deal in his second pro fight. You can get tickets at SpectraTix.com. That's SpectraTix.com. The doors open at 5 p.m. and the first fight is at 5:30. You can find out more at glorykickboxing.com. Good luck to Joshu Cuttino. Next week on the podcast, I will have a returning visit from the American Psycho, Alex Payne, as we continue to talk about his pro wrestling career. Last we left off, and I encourage you to listen to that episode, look us up on iTunes and SoundCloud. He had really just started training at the Ring of Honor Wrestling Academy. Where does his career go from there? We'll find out next week. In the meantime, follow on Twitter at A Few Words with ES, like on Facebook, subscribe on iTunes, give us a good review there too if you're so inclined, listen on SoundCloud, email your feedback, questions, anything, afwpod@gmail.com. On the way out here, Fireside Chat is the band, the song is What It's Like to Know. Listen to more Fireside Chat at soundcloud.com/fireside-chat. Thanks for listening, see you next week, and give me your best shot, pal. I can take it.